The first bankers were not kings. They were exhausted men with carts, counting coins by lantern light, wishing they could make gold lighter and promises heavier. They used scales and knives. They shaved edges, clipped rims, argued over purity in cold rooms thick with smoke. Money was a weight you could feel in your palm. Trust was the ache in your back after carrying it home. Then one day, the weight disappeared. In 11th century Sichuan, merchants folded value into paper. Jiaozi, their notes, began as a convenience, a receipt to spare the journey with sacks of copper. The state standardized the script and stamped seals across inked rectangles that fluttered like small flags of confidence. Suddenly, money could move as fast as a messenger. It could cross mountains without crossing mountains. But what is made light is made fragile. Paper needs a spine that metal never asked for. The spine was restraint. The spine was a promise never to print too much. The first lesson: abstraction accelerates trade and temptation. Kublai Khan learned the second lesson. He did not request trust, he issued it. Mulberry bark notes were value by decree, and the decree rode on horses, and the horses rode with soldiers. Accept the notes or face the empire's logic. For a time it worked brilliantly. Taxes found their mark. Markets cleared faster. Foreign merchants marveled and complied. But compulsion is not credibility. It is only momentum. Inevitably, overissue and imitation crept in, and the notes that once felt like the empire's heartbeat came to feel like its cough. People priced goods with an ear to the drum of the presses. The paper multiplied. The loaf did not. The empire discovered that force can demand acceptance, but only discipline sustains value. Europe's answer was stranger and older, the long memory of debt. In a world of clipped coins and thin treasuries, ledgers did the heavy lifting. A notched stick in a sheriff's chest, a neat line in a Florentine book, a bill of exchange in a merchant's pouch. These were bridges when metal ran short. The tally's split halves fit together years later like bones reuniting, the proof residing in the join. Credit networks formed cathedrals without stone, vaulting trust across cities. In these webs, money was a story two people agreed to tell, and the script was legibility. When paper broke, records mended it. When metal lied, arithmetic corrected it. Then ships began returning with silver that glittered like an answer to every budget. The Spanish crown hauled treasure from Potosi in Mexico to finance empire, ceremony, and war. Bars poured into Seville, and prices crept upward, then climbed. More metal, less bread, more coin, same cloth. Wages trailed. Across a century, Europe learned that even hard money can soften if it arrives faster than grain is milled or taxes are reformed. Inflation was not a trick of paper alone. It was the arithmetic of abundance untethered to production. The empire paid today and stole silently from tomorrow, not with ink, but with a flood of shining discs. Across the channel, another experiment took shape in 1694. A bank not merely to store wealth, but to manufacture it carefully. The Bank of England sold the state's debt to the public, issued notes against those IOUs, and converted national promise into circulating power. War against France could be financed in weeks instead of years. The balance sheet became a battlefield map. This was printing wealth of a subtler sort. Not paper without anchor, but paper with a new anchor. Confidence in taxation, law, and a government that honored its interest payments. The alchemy was visible in London's bustle. Money stretched as needs stretched, contracted when peace and prudence returned. The press had met its supervisor, bond math, and a wary parliament. Across the channel again, a revolution devoured the old collateral and tried to print the future. The French assigned value to church lands and called it money. Assignats, backed by confiscated estates, moved briskly at first. Farmers sold, bakers measured flour with a frisker optimism, then war, faction, and the old seduction. The notes multiplied faster than the auctions of land could justify, faster than trust could follow. Bread prices lurched. Hoarders were hunted. What began as a tidy swap, property for paper, became a bonfire of arithmetic. The language of the streets grew brittle. They promise. They overprint. They will fix it. The paper said liberty. The market said scarcity. In the end, the currency did not die for lack of theory, but for lack of patience and limits. A younger republic, facing its own mortal struggle, tried a different balance. The United States financed the Civil War with taxes, bonds sold to citizens, and legal tender greenbacks, paper with no gold behind it, but with a government, an army, and a plan. Soldiers were paid. Foundries glowed, markets grumbled, adjusted, survived. When peace came, the country walked back toward redemption, not by magic, but by budgets, tariffs, and the credibility of victory. The lesson was narrow and hard won. Fiat can live if issued for survival, hedged by taxation, and retired when fear recedes. Paper can be honest when it knows it must later face coin, or at least the discipline that coin implies. Germany forgot discipline and remembered it violently. After the First World War, debts piled higher than tax receipts, politics jammed the gears, and the printing plates filled the room with their tinny heartbeat. Prices doubled, then sprinted. A worker's wage, paid in the afternoon, bought less by evening. Housewives carried banknotes in baskets. Renters celebrated while creditors watched their past dissolve. The currency did not collapse because it was paper. It collapsed because the state asked it to do the work of taxes, reparations, and stability all at once. When the reformers came, they did not pray over the presses. They changed units, tightened budgets, and rebuilt belief. The Rentenmark worked because it was more than ink. It was a truce between arithmetic and politics. If the early experiments taught fragility, the mid-century world tried a grand architecture for endurance. In 1944, nations met to yoke money to something steadier than politics alone. The dollar would link to gold, other currencies would link to the dollar, trade would ride this scaffolding. For a generation, growth and reconstruction wore this invisible frame. But no peg survives contact with war and deficits without strain. As claims against American gold mounted, first quietly, then in waves, the promise turned brittle. In 1971, the tie was cut. Once again, value would be a matter of institutions, narratives, and the credible restraint of central bankers who owned no mines, commanded no forges, and balanced confidence on their signatures. The age that followed was the age of quantities. In crisis after crisis, money was engineered on screens, not minted in foundries. In 2008, central banks met the panic with balance sheet expansion, aiming hoses at fires that Treasury and mortgage markets could not smother. Interest rates fell until floorboards creaked. Bank reserves swelled. Prices, strangely, did not roar, at least not for bread. They roared for assets, homes levitated, stocks soared. The new printing did not sling bills into streets. It rerouted gravity, lifting things the already wealthy owned. When a pandemic froze commerce, the hoses opened wider. Governments pushed cash to households and firms, and for a time the old debate was settled by necessity. Survival first, accounting later. Then the bill arrived in the quiet way it always does, and rising prices, strained labor, and a loss of innocence about how quickly quantities can change. Through it all, the pattern repeats with costumes refreshed. The song officials learn what modern desks learn. Convenience isn't free. Kublai's decree echoes in every rule that tries to command value rather than persuade it. The tally stick lives on in databases where lines of code reconcile debts more faithfully than some kings ever did. The Spanish silver returns as credit booms, more plentiful than the goods it chases. London's 1694 bargain, state debt turned currency, survives in today's bond markets, whose yields are the thermometer pressed against the nation's forehead. The assignats whisper that collateralized rhetoric is still rhetoric if the printing outruns the auctions. Greenbacks remind that emergency fiat must find its way back to discipline or lose itself. Weimar's wheelbarrows stand in every photograph of annihilated savings and every banker's nightmare. Bretton Woods' architecture left a sketch that policymakers still trace when storms gather. Tie value to something. If not metal, then rules. If not rules, then habits. There's a reason the same lessons must be relearned. Money is a language of power and a mirror of fear. It promises mobility, of grain and of labor, of dreams. And because promises are easy, the temptation to promise too much is endless. Printing wealth is not only a function of presses, it is tax promises brought forward. It is future growth cashed in today. It is a central bank absorbing the bad debts of yesterday so that tomorrow can open its shops. It is also the soft theft of savers when prices run ahead, and the hard theft of opportunity when collapses punish those who never received the boom. If you rewind further, beyond presses and banks, you find barter's limits and the origin of trust. A fisher and a farmer can swap only so much on a shoreline. They need a third thing, portable and impartial, to smooth the exchange of unlike lives. First shells, then metal, then marks on wood, then ink on fiber, then digits in a chilled server room. Each step is an increase in abstraction, and with abstraction comes leverage. Leverage is the god of speed and the devil of collapse. You can move a world with a bar, or you can snap it. The line between support and distortion is not in the tool, but in the hand that uses it. Empires do not die because they print. They die because they forget what the printing stands for. In healthy seasons, paper is a map of real activity. Farmers plowing, engineers wiring, teachers explaining, ship stocking. In unhealthy seasons, paper is a disguise, a mask placed over deficits, a cushion beneath failing firms, a promise extended past prudence. The disguise can work for a while. Masks often do. But value has a face, productivity, legitimacy, and the patient arithmetic of balance. When the mask begins to slip, people look for the face again. They look in tax receipts, in credible budgets, in the quiet competence of institutions that mean what they say. There is no going back to pure metal. There never really was such a thing. Even Rome's coins carried the emperor's head, and the emperor's trustworthiness pressed into their shine. The question is not whether to print wealth, but whether the printing is a bridge or a hiding place. A bridge carries you to the other side and is then left behind. A hiding place makes the room smaller each year until you cannot stand up without hitting your head. If policy builds bridges, time-limited, transparent, matched to real repair, the notes can feel like wings. If policy builds warrens, permanent, obscure, designed to keep fear out but also light, do not be surprised if tunnels collapse. Listen closely to the present, and you will hear familiar sounds. A central banker adjusting a sentence and shifting billions. A legislature discovering that promises are cheaper than votes and more expensive than years. A household choosing whether to save in something that yields safety or merely the illusion of it. None of these sounds are new. They are the rustle of jiaozi, the crack of a tally stick, the hum of a press in Berlin, the click of a keyboard at a trading desk in New York. The technology's changed. Human nature rehearsed the same script. When empires learned to print wealth, they learned to amplify themselves. Trade quickened, armies synchronized, roads lengthened, lamps burned longer. They also learned to amplify their mistakes. Greed became systemic. Panic traveled at the speed of rumor. The bill for every shortcut, deferred long enough, returned with interest. The coins looked the same. The value didn't. The paper felt the same. The trust didn't. The screen looked the same. The story behind it didn't. A sober future doesn't require a return to gold, to sticks, or to kings. It requires a return to memory. Memory that money is a claim on the real, not a substitute for it. Memory that transparency outruns charisma, and that budgets are moral documents. Memory that restraint is not austerity, but oxygen. If we remember, the press can be a printing of bridges, not illusions. If we forget, the lessons will arrive the old way. Slowly, then suddenly, then all at once, with grocery shelves and balance sheets teaching what books and ancestors already wrote. History doesn't repeat, but it keeps the plates. You decide what to print on them.